now take a look at just how the unrest in Libya is affecting its oil industry. Well, Libya produces just under 2% of the world's oil, but 85% of its crude is sent to European refineries. The biggest buyers are Italy, France, Germany and Spain. Their Libyan crude is turned into diesel and jet fuel. Production is continuing in Libya, but the fighting has resulted in a drop in output of about 50%. And many foreign oil workers have, of course, now been airlifted out of the country. Access is proving to be a problem as well. The tankers which normally deliver crude to Europe are being told to stay more than 160 kilometres offshore from some Libyan ports and wait until it is safe to dock. Well, Dr. Manucher Takin, a senior analyst from the Centre for Global Energy Studios, joins me now here in the studio. Thanks so much for coming in. Just how reliant are some European countries on Libyan oil, and is it time for them to now look at possible alternatives?
Well, as you said already, the figures. For example, Italy, about 1.5 million barrels per day of its consumption, a third of it, almost 500,000 barrels per day, comes from Italy. So they are dependent, and Italy especially. But I think this is, we should not exaggerate this. There is a mismatch, a teething problem, which will be for a few weeks, maybe a month or so. But Saudi Arabia is producing, has already increased production so that they can supply. There's a different type of crude. It has to be transported from the Persian Gulf all the way. So there is an element on this. The International Energy Agency, the Industrialized Countries Center, they can have, again, they can replace the oil by emergency rationing. They have strategic reserves. So it is not the end of the world.
So you're sort of saying residents in these countries, like Italy, like France, like Spain, they're not going to notice any difference? Because
well, there will be. There will be. There's a teething problem. It takes time. It takes a few days and so on. But they can manage. It is not a crisis which is like the 1973 Arab oil embargo. The world is prepared for it. The rest of the world also are used to having cut off of operations and then supplies coming in. The world is less dependent on oil, and on supply current basis, there are arrangements ready by the industrialized countries to replace any sudden disruption. Saudi Arabia, OPEC have a spare capacity, they can. But the time of a few days, a week or so, is what is going to, what happens.
Assuming the turmoil in Libya does calm down and production can get underway properly again, I know it's still continuing, but it's, you know, half of what it was. Yes. Isn't Libya itself going to have a problem with producing the oil? Because most of its foreign workers and its foreign oil experts have, of course, fled the country. There's no guarantee they're going to go back.
Well, then it depends on, it's really a political question. If the politics is a smooth transfer to a new government, whatever the shade of the politics of a new government, they do want to produce oil and export and generate revenue, because that is the main point of the people crying. As well as freedom, they want also have higher standard of living. So I think any government would like to do that. I'm sure then they would provide security and try to attract, giving higher salaries. But in practice, of course, there is a hiatus. There is a disruption. But I'm sure, comparing with the previous experiences of similar disruptions, the oil will flow sooner or later, and the people will also go back because that is their job, their opportunities. But of course, it's a tragedy what has happened to the people of Libyans themselves, so many killed. That is a story that we should not forget, and that's what we see on our screen. The oil story, management and operations and disruptions can smooth themselves. I think the media, the futures paper barrel has exaggerated this thing. They have this knee-jerk reaction, which I don't think it is justified, but that is the way the financial market and the stock market always reacts.
Very volatile. Dr. Manucher Takin, thank you very much indeed for your views on that story. More from Europe a little later in this news hour, but right now let's return you to Doha.
Spotlight on Yemen now. The opposition there saying it won't be joining any unity government at all. The president expected to announce that he would be forming one, he hoped, soon. An opposition coalition of political groups and anti-government protesters want the president to step down. And tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people have been protesting about his leadership. Well, let's bring in Mohammed Abdul Majid Al-Khattabi. Dr. Khattabi is a senior member of the ruling party in Yemen, joins us now from Sana'a. Dr. Khattabi, thanks for your patience. I know you've been waiting there for some time. Are you worried about events in your country?
First, just to correct my name, David, it's Kubati, 3 syllables, Kubati. Yes, everybody is worried. I think what is worrying us mostly, that it seems that both sides are now are maneuvering, and we are worried that such transitions from both sides is quite driving the country to a sort of a Samson-like option. And hopefully they're not going to sort of bring down the temple on the heads of everybody here in Yemen. I think the opposition had a very good chance to be more proactive towards the suggestion today from the president that they should join a national unity government. And previously, I think he said that he was willing even to offer them to be the head of the government, you know, to be the position of a prime minister, to be with them, and some of the other, you know, key positions in the government. I think it would have been much more, perhaps positive of them to put some conditions if they wanted.
But let me ask you this.
What's this government?
First of all, I must apologise for getting your name wrong, Dr. Al-Khattabi. I'm not doing very well tonight with that in that department, but do forgive me. But let me ask you, when you say these two parties are to blame for this position, I guess you're talking about the president and the opposition, but you're part of the ruling party. Aren't you to blame as well for not fulfilling the wishes of the people in Yemen?
Well, actually speaking, speaking about parties in Yemen, I think it's a question which is rather, you know, I don't agree with it, as there are two opposing groups now. Unfortunately, within both groups, you could find modernizers who are really actually losing the battle. The modernizers from both sides of the government and of the opposition, I think, are losing the war now, if there is a war of tug. Because I think that the way forward now is, especially after the president on the 2nd of February, when he said that he's willing to relinquish power and he's going to step down, he's not going to stand for further term. And especially a week ago, when one of the ministers came out and wrote in one of the official newspapers that the president, he was asking the president to step down in a matter of 6 months.
But isn't it the way across the rest of Middle East and North Africa? Isn't it the way of the world at the moment that the modernizers, the young people, they want change? And if you say they want too much change, they're not going to listen to you. They're going to say, out with the president, in with the new.
Yes, but I said that's what I said. I said today the modernizers or the people who are with change have lost a chance. If they came out, if the opposition came out with an affirmative sort of suggestion saying, what is this government? What's the program of this government? What is its actual agenda? Is this an interim government which is going to overlook and oversee and supervise the interim, you know, or time between now and say 3, 6, 8 months, a year or something, where there would be a safe sort of transfer of power, where there would be, you know,
but you know what they're worried about, don't you? You know what they're worried about?
I don't know what
I would put this forward. I think they're worried.
Could you explain it? Could you explain it for me, David?
Okay.
I think
Listen,
I've heard you saying that
I'm not the expert in Yemeni politics. I know that you are. But let me just put it this way. What they're worried about, it appears to me, is that they would get in, there would be an interim government, and the promises that they wanted to have fulfilled would be pushed to one side. That somebody would say, yes, 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 and then, of course, they'd turn around and say, actually, no, we're not interested in that. That's the concern.
No, there could be conditions. There could be conditions, David, on forming such a government. I don't think Hezbollah was dumb, you know, to accept that sort of conditions when they entered into government in Lebanon. When they are in the head position of when they are actually having key positions in this government. Suppose that if they wanted some change, they could say, well, we want the Ministry of Defense, we want the Ministry of Interior, and both these positions would be taken by civilian people. So they will be managing actually which is the most sort of area where there is a lot of intelligence, is the area how are we going to control the security and the army. If a civil government come and people agree that the civilians are going to sort of manage all these issues which are quite dangerous at this phase, I know, then that would have been a much more positive position, just rather than saying no and just pulling aside. Because as I have said, there are a lot of indications here that the president was actually he was meaning what he did mean what he said. that
Okay.
he's leaving and he's going to relinquish power.
Doctor, thank you very much indeed. Clearly the protesters don't think the president means what he says, but that's not for you and me to argue about. I appreciate the fact that you managed to get my name right all the way through that interview. And once again, apologies for making a mistake with yours. Good to talk to you. Elsewhere in the region, there's unrest as well. In Jordan, opposition leaders are continuing to demand a greater pace of reform there, despite the promise of new laws, a promise made this year by the Prime Minister. At least 5,000 supporters of King Abdullah gathered in Amman on Sunday, showing their allegiance to the royal flag. This loyalist rally coming after opposition protests, which have been held on 8 consecutive Fridays. Oman next. And this Sohar, a major industrial city in the north, and a supermarket there apparently on fire after looting. Protesters are blocking roads to 2 of Oman's main ports involved in exports on Monday. A doctor has said that 6 people died in Sohar a day earlier during clashes with the police, but the health minister says just 1 person died and 20 were injured. In Bahrain, a parliament meeting has been cancelled after protesters stopped upper chamber members from reaching the entrance to their building. Rallies have been held in key Manama locations to put pressure on the monarchy to bring about change. King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa has reshuffled his cabinet and appealed for talks with the opposition. We're going to be back in just a moment. More on Libya, the uprising there where anti-Gaddafi protests are being reported now in the capital, Tripoli. And a year after Chile's massive earthquake, AlJazeera travels back to this disaster zone to see what's changed.
Behind the harsh reality of headline stories, creative forces are constantly developing. Across the globe, people use their talents, their imagination, and their vision to break down powerful barriers. From a small backroom theater challenging a despotic regime, to the courage of individuals searching for expression. With rich colors and clear voices, people communicate to a wider world. Artscape, coming soon on Al Jazeera.
2 generations face the past in order to understand the present. A young man embarks on a journey with his father in search of answers. Great changes in China have brought their traditional family way of life to a crisis point. Faces of China, at this time on Al Jazeera.
Right, these are the top stories for you here on this Al Jazeera News Hour. Egypt's former president Hosni Mubarak and his family have been issued with a travel ban by the country's public prosecutor, apparently pending further investigations. And there's been a freeze on their money, their financial assets inside Egypt. Yemen's opposition says it won't be joining a unity government with the president. Political groups and anti-government protesters want the president to step down. Tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people have been protesting about his leadership. Libyans fleeing parts of the country still held by Colonel Gaddafi. And more protests are being reported in the capital, Tripoli. According to the Reuters news agency, security forces fired into the air to disperse the crowds there. OK, Tariq Youssef with us, Senior Research Fellow at the Dubai School of Government from Benghazi, the city where the protests kicked off. Actually, I don't know whether exactly that's where they kicked off, but certainly that's been the focus of protests in the east of the country. What are you hearing out of that city at the moment?
Jubilation, joy, celebrations.
Organisation?
Organisation to some extent. I've actually been quite surprised by the civility and the sophistication displayed by the Libyans in Benghazi after 42 years of Gaddafi's rule. They've managed to form a city council. They have a provisional government representing